Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the September 26th, 2023 Board of Education meeting. We are calling the meeting to order, and it is 7:02 p.m. And if everyone could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading of meeting notice. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provision of the Act, the Verona Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published in the Star Ledger, posted with the Township of Verona and the Verona Education Association. Postings of this meeting set forth the time, location, and agenda were posted at the Verona Board of Education office and on the Verona Public Schools District website. Copies of tonight's agendas and resolutions have been made available to the public via the Board of Education website. Mr. Cruz, if you could please call attendance.
Mr. Walker, present. Mrs. Frizella,
Here.
Mrs. Ferrara, Mrs. Prisco,
Here.
Mrs. Freshy.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our agenda, we are going to go into our superintendent's report first with Mrs. DiGiuseppe.
Good evening. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep my report fairly short tonight. Most of my report will be handed over to our guests this evening. First, we'll hear from Dr. Richard Grip of Statistical Forecasting, and he's going to do a presentation on the demographic study, And then Charlene Peterson, our rep from New Jersey School Boards, is here for the final discussion on the strategic plan. But before we get started with those two presentations, I do want to just congratulate some of our students. First, and our FN Brown students who take part annually in our Essex County poster contest. We had a third place winner this year. So Cole Reynolds was took third place. And his artwork is on the November month calendar of that calendar. Alexander Menville is on the January 2024 calendar. Autumn Harder is in the September 2024 calendar, and Christian Cruz is in the October 2024 section of that calendar. We also had honorable mentions their artwork is listed on the honorable mention page in the back of the calendar. And that's N.A. Desai, Desmond Barrows, Emily Sexton, Francesca Molinaro, Lily Bullock, and London Wolf. Congrats to those students that did tremendous artwork and made it into the 2023-24 15-month calendar. I believe you can order a calendar on the Essex County website. Also, congratulations to 3 Verona High School students who were commended scholars for the National Merit Scholarship Program. That's Grace McMahon, Riley Ying, and Patrick Howman. These students were among the top 50,000 highest scorers on the PSAT National Merit semifinals qualifying test, which is impressive. So congratulations to those students. I'm sorry if I took something away from your report, Reese. So I'd like to first introduce Dr. Richard Grip from Statistical Forecasting, and just note that it was a really interesting report that you sent us. I thought I was going to struggle with understanding your methods, but it was very clear. So thank you for that. Good evening.
So tonight, and also at Bridgewater Raritan. In Somerset County, I was a physics and statistics teacher, and I was going for my doctorate at the time, and I had no idea what to write my dissertation on. And the superintendent told me that I should do a dissertation that relates to school demography and projecting enrollments. And here we are 25 years later. Crazy story, but true. So I still like to publish in this field, and I still do it around the country. I grew up not too far from here in Secaucus, but now live in Vermont for the last 20 some odd years. So it's quite a switch. You're from Secaucus too? Oh, strange. So what is a demographic study? So it's basically, as you might think, projecting enrollments, but I always like to tell people, because a lot of you probably never even seen one in your life before, that it's a lot more than that. We like to kind of look at the community first and drill down. Gotta love all this technology, especially when it doesn't work. So you can just see that most of the growth, the biggest growth actually in Verona was in the 50s, where you had about a 25% gain, but pretty much has been fairly stable. And in 2020, which is the most recent data that we have, you're looking at something around 14,500 people, which is not a very, very large community by any standards. The number that you see on the far right, which is over 15,000 persons, that's from a third-party organization called the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. That's what they're projecting your population to be in 2050. Don't look too hard at that number because it's going to change. It was based off of 2017 data, not the 2020 census, because it wasn't available at that point in time when they did their projections. But I would say, looking at your community, I would guess somewhere around 50, like maybe upper 15s to around 16,000. So who are you as a community? When we look at communities, it's very interesting. You can have one community that's right next door to another that's completely different. In the state of New Jersey, it's with 600 and so municipalities, that's what we find. But you're close to about 80% white. You can see about 10% Hispanic, 5% Asian, African Americans less than that. That's why it's not up there. These are the top three. But what we found for your community, and this is again around the state, a decreasing white population and an increasing Hispanic population. The median age is a little bit older than we'd like to see for generating children through births. The median age is about 45, where the state's about 40. Not too many foreign born here, 9% compared to the state's 23%. India and Poland are the largest sources. Very, very educated community. You can see up there about 67%, 68% have a bachelor's degree or higher compared to the state median of 42%. A wealthy community of 141,000 for the income compared to the state of around 90,000. 6,000 housing units, of which about 2/3 are one-unit homes. That would be a detached single family or a townhouse condo. 18% are rent or occupied. That's less than the state. We look at that because it determines usually migration. If you have more renters, you're going to have kids coming and going. And the median value of an owner-occupied unit is $483,000. That means that's the 50th percentile. 50% of the homes have a value greater than that, 50% or lower. That's just a little statistics. So there's the locations of all your schools, middle, high, and the 4 elementaries. Here is the elementary attendance zones. So we did that because we wound up projecting the enrollments by school. And the district was nice enough to provide us a list of all the streets and your addresses. So if you live on X street with this particular address, this is where you'd go to school for elementary school. So when we look at your historical enrollments, we look at it over a 10-year period. And I like to look at it that way because a lot of things can happen in 10 years. Number one, something called a pandemic happened a few years ago, and that's really done some incredibly wild things in demography, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation tonight. But the enrollment as of last October 15th, now you might say, well, why that crazy day? That's the date that the enrollment from your community is uploaded to and something called NJ Smart, which is up to Trenton's enrollment database. And that's the date that you report your enrollment each year. So when we look at your data, it's not your June 30th counts or somewhere in between. It's always the same date. It's October 15th. Last October, because we finished the study in May, it was about 2,147 and a half students. That half is a shared time student. If you look at it from 10 years prior at the 13, 14 year, really not much of a change, 35 and a half students decline. What we did see is that your enrollments were going up through the 1920 school year. And then we saw this reversal trend, and that's due to the pandemic. You had a loss of 84 students due to the pandemic. We had thought a lot of students would return after the pandemic when school districts went online. When they went online, a lot of people either went parochial or they just left. But we didn't really see that bump up in a lot of school districts in the next year. So to project enrollments, we do something called the cohort survival ratio method. That's a state approved methodology. I'll talk about that in a moment. So there's your enrollments. You can see at the far right, that little decline that I'm talking about, that you were going up, and then it's been going down the last couple of years. A little bit of a bounce back this most current 22-23 year. Now we're in 23-24. But when we look at this is the elementary, the middle, and the high school broken out, PK to 4, 5 to 8, and 9 to 12. For the elementary groupings, what we saw is that you had declining enrollment through the 15-16 school year before it reversed trend. If we look at the enrollment of elementary from the last 10 years, just the endpoints, the difference is only 4 students. Really hasn't changed that much. For Whitehorn, the middle school, it actually declined through the 2020 school year before it reversed trend. And the high school did the reverse. It increased through the 19-20 year before it reversed trend. And usually I say to school districts that have really interesting trends, and what I mean that, I mean by changing a lot, look at the elementary population, because that's going to dictate what's going to happen 5 years out for middle school and then a little bit later on for high school, because those cohorts slide through the system and impact. But your enrollment at the elementary level really hasn't shifted that much. So the cohort survival ratio method, really briefly, I don't want to see your eyes glaze over and fall asleep. That's my goal here, and I try to keep people awake. But when we do these survival ratios or progression ratios, what are they? And this is the whole crux of enrollment projection methodology. We take a look at a simple example here. If you have 100 first graders in the 21-22 school year, they advance to second grade and you only have 95 of them. So you lose 5 in the net. That survival rate or grade progression rate is 95 over 100 or 0.95. So we do these survival ratios from birth to kindergarten, which is a 5-year span, all the way up through 11th through 12th. So there's 13 possible grade progressions. If their values are above 1, you're gaining students due to inward migration. If the values are below 1, you're losing them due to outward migration. So we compute those ratios for 10 historical years. And then we take averages, because there could always be outlier numbers. And the averages are usually from the last 5 years or so. So for your averages of those 13 ratios that I talked about, 10 of them of the averages were above 1. What does that mean in English? It means that you have inward migration of people moving into the school district on the whole. We did see that the 2 of the 3 ratios that were below 1 were actually at the elementary level. That could be parents just choosing to send the kids to go to parochial or private at some point. Usually you see that at the high school level in districts, but not seeing that here because people are staying here. So there were 4 ratios in the 2020 school year that were the lowest over the last decade. So you were impacted by the pandemic, and we did remove a lot of those ratios when we were calculating forward your enrollments, not to have them dragged down by the pandemic's effects. So we do compute an average ratio for each grade progression. We multiply it times the most current enrollment and carry it through the whole 5 years, and voila, there's your projections. That's really the simple explanation. You have a phenomenon here called kindergarten replacement, and particularly negative kindergarten replacements range between 6 and 47.5 students for the last decade. What is it? Negative kindergarten replacement is when you have more students leaving as 12th graders graduating than are going to be replaced as kindergarten the following year. So in a real simple example, if you have 500 seniors graduating in a year, to keep your enrollment level the following year, you need 500 kindergarten students to replace them. You're not having enough kindergarten students to come in to replace your outgoing senior class, typically year over year. But the good news is if you look at that chart, that shows what it is over the last decade. The numbers are fairly small, which means that, yeah, you do have some negative kindergarten replacement, but the sizes of the kindergarten classes and the senior class are fairly similar in size, except in the last couple years, which was in the pandemic, which you probably did not have as many kindergarten students as you normally would entering a district, just because as a parent, you probably don't want your kids coming to school during the pandemic at kindergarten. A lot of people withheld their kids during those years. This is just showing the relationship, what the kindergarten replacement is in gray, the enrollment change is in blue year over year. And what you actually will see, if you just look at the far one on the right, you can see the negative kindergarten replacement, but you actually had a gain in enrollment that particular year because of the inward migration you have in the district. It's enough to overcome this phenomena of negative kindergarten replacement. And it happens most of the times in your district, either partially overcoming the negative kindergarten replacement or completely overcoming it. So BERTs are used to project kindergarten counts 5 years later. We looked at BERTs from the 2008 to 21 period. And really the BERTs just range from 119 to 163, not really much of a pattern, 158 BERTs in the most current year that we had, which was 2021. And there you can see the BERTs. When we looked at the BERTs and how they are affected with the relationship with kindergarten students 5 years later, this chart is showing you BERTs, and then 5 years later, how many kindergarten students show up on your doorstep, and then the BERT to kindergarten survival ratio, which is just simply column 3 divided by 2. And all the values you can see up to a point, or most of them, were above 1, which means that in the net, you're gaining kids. They're born in other communities, Cedar Grove perhaps, or some other surrounding town, and they're moving in here because they want to educate their kids in your school district because it has a great reputation. That's common. But what has happened in the last 3 years, you can see those values have declined. And I really believe that's pandemic driven, is that you lost some people. There's been some research where people in certain countries, particularly, they had to send their kids back to family members in a foreign country with relatives because they had to work during the pandemic because they were working in, say, service industries. And those kids may never come back to your school district. That may not be the case in this particular district, but I'm just giving you an example that there are effects of the pandemic. This is just showing the BERTs by elementary attendance area over the last 13 years. You can see the brown attendance area has the most number of BERTs over this time in the aggregate, which is the 670 down there on the bottom. The last column says unknown, which means that we know that a woman from Verona had a birth, but we don't know exactly where she lives, so we couldn't assign it to an attendance area. This is showing the BERTs by block, census block from 2008. And what we did is, this is kind of complicated. We got the BERT data from the state, and then we aggregated it by a census block. The census block is the smallest geographical area that is available at the census level. Then it goes up to a tract level, things like that. So you can see the darkest blue is where the greatest number of BERTs were in the township over this time period. And I'm just going to fast forward to 2021, and you can see where that shift is. So greater BERTs in the northwest part The southern part, I guess that would be the brown area up in the northwest, and the south could be maybe Brookdale or maybe even Forest Avenue in some of those areas. And then when we looked in the aggregate, if we added up all the births by block over that 13-year period, you can see up in the northwest again is where the greatest number of births are. So you can start to see what's happening here and where some of the increases are occurring. Now, this is just showing you an age-sex diagram. An age-sex diagram is simply demography 101. It's the percentage of males and females in each age class or cohort plotted back to back from 0 to 4 all the way up to 85 and up. So males are in orange and females are in green. So this is from 2010. And in 2010, the biggest grouping for that particular year for males and females was both the 45 to 49 age group. Do you see how in the 20s and 30s down here is sort of cut out like an apple, like somebody bit into it? And that's in communities where people can't afford in that 20 and 30 age group to get into your community, either high property values, high property taxes, something along those lines. Maybe the housing, there's not enough rental apartments, things like that. That's common for a district factor grouping, probably like yours. If we advance it to the next group, we didn't have the 2020 census data at that point in time for age and sex. So we got something called the 2017 to 21 American Community Survey. It looks like a mishmash, but I guarantee you when it's 2020, it'll look a lot nicer like the last one. But the males with the largest groups was the 40 to 45, 40 to 44, and females was 50 to 54. So again, an aging population, which usually does not help grow school districts. This is just showing for males and females over time, which are the biggest decliners over this time period in red, and which are the biggest gainers. You can see in blue. I'm just going to focus on the blue. It's people 70 to 74 for males, and I think that's 50 to 54 for females. So you're, an aging population that's continuing to age. And, housing turnover, like many you're going to say to me, I can almost guarantee at the end, you're going to say, well, aren't these seniors or empty nesters going to sell their homes and all these people are going to rush in with kids? It doesn't happen that quickly. And we could talk about that more if you want. But with respect to new housing, this is always a key piece. How many new housing starts are going to be here and how will that impact the district? So right now, there's two main sites. The Cameco site, which is 95 units, has been approved. It's supposedly going to be breaking ground in the early part of 2024. The other one you see up there, and that's all affordable, by the way, which has a much greater number of children that come in out of those units than a market rate home. And the other one's called Verona Sunset Urban Renewal, which when we talked to the planning board was not approved yet, of about 200 units. There was another possible development on Bloomfield Avenue, but that's been in litigation with the township for the last 6 years, and we did not put that in there because it may never get approved and may never get out of litigation. But you can see at the very bottom, it tells you that we're projecting about 102 students out of those developments, and we did factor that into the projections. This is just showing you historically where all the residential construction has occurred in the township. We broke it up by year and by elementary attendance area to show you where the greatest number of units are. And Brookdale Avenue's got the most on the left because of a development called Annan Lofts of about 118 units that happened in 2018. So we did look at historical patterns as well. This is just showing every yellow dot that you see up there is where a new house was constructed in the last 5 or 6 years. This is showing, it's too bad we can't see some of that top part, the title, you might not be able to see that. But this is home sales for the last 10 years in Verona. You can see that once we got through that period of the banking and financial crisis, the late 2000s, home sales have ramped up. You can see the drop off in 2022, probably because of the interest rates that have gone up. Who wants to sell a home if I'm in a 3.5% mortgage and buy one with 7.5%? So we are seeing a cool down in the housing market. This is just showing home sales by block over time, where have all the sales happened. It's mostly the darker blues is where in the last 5 or 6 years, you can see on the eastern part of the township and also the southern part. So let's get to what I was probably really hired to talk about tonight, which is your enrollments. So your enrollments going forward, we did do 2 sets of projections. And you might say, is that common? I absolutely say all the time, because this is not an exact science. We try to do our best with the data that's given. So the two that we did for the 5-year periods, we called a baseline projection, which is, let's factor out all the housing, pretend it's not going to ever happen. Maybe it won't. And the other one is we call adjusted. What if all those housing units are built? How will that impact the school district? So you can see that there are two numbers down there at the bottom. The baseline is still projecting a gain of around 70 students, where the adjusted is much more, of 152 students with respect to all those units that are coming online. That's if everything gets approved. Don't forget, not everything's been approved. When we look at the enrollment projections by grade configuration, this is showing over the 5-year period, the baseline and the adjusted for elementary, middle, and high. Red decline, blue is a gain. And you can see that the biggest gain, you can't really see that one value there, because that the picture in picture there is being blocking that. But you can see that the biggest gain is really at the middle school level. That's what's being projected. So when we look at the capacity of each building with respect to the enrollments, the capacities are how you are using the buildings currently. It's not a fire code capacity, like you're not allowed to have more than 250 children. The board policies are based on, let's say, we educate 22 kids in a classroom, and we have 20 classrooms. So 22 times 20 is 440. And that's our capacity. So if you raise the capacity, raise the number of children you were going to educate in a classroom to 25, you can easily raise the capacity in a building. Or if you have more small group instruction rooms in your building, taking them away from general ed, you're going to reduce the capacity, because you can't have as many kids in small group instruction, say as gifted and talented, special ed, things like that. So anyway, what you're seeing here is that the first set of numbers is showing your current enrollment as of the 22-23 school year. The difference is the blue is showing you a surplus, red is showing you you have a shortage of seating. Doesn't mean anybody's sitting out in the hallway. You can accommodate them. It could be tight, but you can see that over time, brown is projected to have more unhoused students. That's a fancy word for this, or shortage of seats, than they do currently. And at the middle and high school, also those numbers are projected to go up as well. Still surpluses in 3 of the elementary schools. So lastly, tonight we'll just talk about COVID. COVID has had a massive impact on enrollments across the country. New York, I did not put that up there for the enrollment decline that they had, but there's somewhere around 35 students they lost. And now they have other issues because there's a migrant crisis of people moving in. But you can see the numbers of students in big districts around the country. What happened? Where did these kids go? That's the big question. In where I live in Vermont, we saw a surge, and they were coming from New Jersey. They were coming from Westchester. They were coming up there to their second homes, and they were staying in there. And then the snow came, and they saw how much snow we have to shovel. And then they decided to hightail it back home. Some of them. Not everybody, because what's happened, as you know, there's something called hybrid work or maybe remote work, and people can get away with that. But if we all have to go back to the office someday, I'm not really so sure. And this could impact the enrollments again, as parents they have to be anchored into one particular location. So this just shows you a map from the beginning of the pandemic to about a year and a half later of where people moved, gains and losses. The gains are actually in green. The biggest declines are in that magenta, and you can see the Rocky Mountain states picked up the most people after the pandemic, where the heartland of the country lost the most. So I know the next question is, well, about New Jersey, right? So, in Essex County, you're kind of in that turnpike area belt, right? The biggest decliners of population, same time frame, is right down the gut of the turnpike, right down through Trenton. The biggest gainers is that yellow blob down there, and that's Ocean County. Another theory of mine is all people that own a home in Long Beach Island, that's where they went. And then the people from Bergen County, which do have a lot of people that have homes down Long Beach Island, they left. So, that's kind of an interesting theory. I don't know for sure exactly, this is from, you can get IRS migration data to see where people are coming and going. So tonight's summary is, and I really appreciate your patience for listening to me for all this time, is that your enrollments are projected to go up slowly in the next 5 years. they had been going up slowly. And then the pandemic happened. But I still think that even though the pandemic happened, that does not mean that you're going to decline. I still think people are going to come into this community because of your school system. The inward migration is there. It's going to continue. So consider that as a blip on the radar, that pandemic. So because of that inward migration of children and 295 new housing units, we're projecting an enrollment gain going forward. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to questions if there are any.
I have one
Very much.
question. First, I'm happy to know that I'm in the most fertile part of Verona, not because of me. But we got that, the estimate you made is 102 new students based on the housing development. What data got you to the point where you said, because we're wondering, are we going to see an influx of kids that are all, when there's a new housing development, is it often the times where the kids are middle school that come in or elementary? Did you do like an even distribution? How did that work out?
That's a great question. So I'm actually going to tell you that because I didn't put it in there, but I wrote it down in my notes just in case someone did ask me that question. So elementary, I'm projecting 44, middle 30, high school 28. 44, 30, 28. And the way we come up with that, that's just not, there's a formula actually, and here's how we get it. So Rutgers University, the Center for Urban Policy Research, comes out with a manual. It's about the size of a massive old fashioned phone book that tells you how many children to expect in the state average for a detached single family, a townhouse, an apartment, based on bedroom distributions, based upon the value of the home, so on, so on, so on. So we're using those numbers, statewide averages, on how many children you expect elementary, middle, and high. And that's how those numbers were generated.
Thank you. One more follow-up, and thank you for that answer. And I don't know if this was even part of the scope of of your survey or if that was a different one we had done, but I agree that in certain classrooms you can add more desks and now you have more seats. But in other things, like there's only X amount of space at a lunchroom, right? So you can't add on. So I guess, in the future, because we had talked about this very topic at our board retreat, maybe if we can get an idea of, in our elementaries, how many rooms are currently being used for either art or library that could potentially be retrofitted if the need, came up? Because I don't think, at least I don't know that. So I guess it's not really a question for you, but thank you though.
I can kind of add a little bit to that. So I'm not an architect and I'm not standing here telling you anything that I can really with great intelligence and knowledge, but I do know a little bit just working with some of these guys is that some spaces like this are not capacity generating. A library is not capacity generating, a gym is not capacity generating, a cafeteria is not capacity generating. But I think your long-range facility plan, if I remember correctly, and I have to go back in the report, but I want to think it's the values I'm using are about 10 years old. So you may not even be, using these capacity numbers I'm showing you may not be accurate at all. That would be something you'd want to talk to your architect. They would be able to know exactly the capacity of these buildings. Sure.
Thank you. So I want to thank you again for the presentation. It's very informative. And I have a question really focusing on the new developments that's going up in Verona. The Camco property, they actually started working because I work right across the street from the building. And the question I have is, in that building alone, there's 95 units there, but out of that, there's going to be 26 units that are three bedrooms. So in my mind, when I think of a 3-bedroom home, I'm thinking that there's going to probably be 2, 3, maybe 4 children, possibly in a 3-bedroom, two boys, 2 girls, whatever, sharing rooms. So even if I calculated like 26 times 2.5, that would come out to like 65 students right there alone in that one building. So to me, I feel like that 102 number could be a little bit on the lower side, because then we have 53 2-bedrooms, and most likely the 2-bedroom units, I would imagine, would have at least 1 child in there. That's just my, I'm not an expert, but I just thought that these numbers are really, I feel like, going to impact our schools, and especially the Camco, because they're, housed to go to elementary school at FM Brown, which is already busting at the seams. So that's why I was just concerned, because I feel like that, the 3 bedrooms and even the 53 2 bedrooms there. And also at the Sunset property, there's 105 2 bedrooms there. They only have 3 3 bedrooms, so it's a lot less 3 bedrooms. So I just kind of feel like that 102 number might be a little bit on the lower side, in my opinion.
All right,
Sorry.
I'm going to add to that,
Okay.
or I'm going to challenge you, actually. So the answer is I mean, we all think, a lot of us think that, you build a home, you're going to get 3 kids in a house, or I'm going to be honest with you. Birth rates are way down across the country. Japan, forget about it. But what's happening is you're just not getting as many kids as you might expect. I'm going to give you the number that the affordable housing units are expecting at a 3-bedroom apartment. It's 1.087. So your estimation of 2 is about half that. For a 2-bedroom unit, you'd be looking at around 0.6 kids per unit. And for a 1-bedroom, it's really small. It's around 0.15 or 0.18, something like that. So that's where why they seem so low to you, is because those are the values we're using from the state. This is based on taking a massive sample of affordable housing units and doing a lot of cranking of numbers and joining property databases to student databases. So this is hard, good data. I trust it.
Question, and you may not have the answer to this, but you mentioned the migration influx that we're seeing in New York City, and we're so
Mhm,
close.
mhm.
In your opinion, how long do you think, or do you have a projection as to how long we may see that influx? Is that something that,
From there to here,
yeah,
I don't think so. First of all, that is a very complicated situation over there. Very complicated. I just don't see it. A lot of immigrants do like to stay close to their own. And unless you have a real heavy immigrant population of some specific type here, I wouldn't expect that. They're just not going to come pick Verona out on a map and come out here. So I don't think so. I do see them getting bussed upstate somewhere toward Albany. It's a very contentious issue. I'm sure you've seen in the news. It's just like, who's paying for all this? That's really what it comes down to. It's a lot of money. But I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation.
You're
That
welcome.
was very interesting. For earlier, you mentioned the potential influx or just a slight uptick due to aging population moving out, housing becoming available. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, great question. So I did mention that one question I usually get is that housing turnover. A lot of people are worried that as you get these older folks that are empty nesters like myself, and we're going to downsize, and we're going to sell it to people with families with kids. And a lot of people feel that it's going to. And when you look at a population like I showed you, when it's stacked and the people in their 50s and above, you say, "Wow, we're ripe for that to happen." And you're going to have this massive number that are going to sell, but it doesn't happen all at once. And I'll tell you why. There was an article I read from AARP that a lot of people in their 50s, 60s, and up don't sell when you might think that they're going to move to North Carolina and Florida where there's no income tax, because they got grandkids that are in the general vicinity and that anchors them, or they're very involved in their community in some type of volunteer organizations, church, what have you. And that keeps people there. So yes, there's probably financial reason for them to leave, get rid of the high property taxes and whatnot, but they're here for other reasons, more intrinsic reasons. So when we were not asked to do a housing turnover analysis for your community, but for ones that I deal with, were homes that are owned 35 or 40 years, we see turnover rates less than 1% of the homes that are owned that long. So, it doesn't happen like you might think, that 10% or 20% are going to sell in their 35th or 40th year of ownership. It just doesn't happen.
To that point, I am in that demographic as empty
So am I.
nest. I'm not going anywhere, because for what my 2.5% refinance mortgage is, I can't rent a studio apartment for less than what I'm paying.
Absolutely.
So you're not going.
That's another reason. So that's the financial element of that. unless, people move to, I don't know how much cheaper Florida is, but from what I've been hearing, it's not that much lately. Yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much for coming
I
out.
feel more at ease. I thought the numbers were going to be a lot more.
Yeah, and that's what I got too. Like even when I read through it myself without the explanation, I was like, oh, this isn't as dramatic as I was expecting it to be, which is hopeful because, future decisions of this board and how we run is very, hanging on our student population and this new development. So yeah, this was, I feel like a good news report.
Well, and I know the truth be told, a lot of people get nervous when they hear affordable housing units. And there is, for instance, I have it written down here. So a market rate 3-bedroom unit apartment would be 0.82 kids per housing unit, and an affordable is 1.087. So yeah, there's definitely there's more children expected, but I don't think it's so earth-shatteringly different that, people should really be worried when you hear the word affordable housing. That's my personal feeling.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I appreciate you listening to me because my wife doesn't like me talking about this all the time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like the career path too for, people who like numbers and projections. It's pretty fascinating.
Talk to kids if they, because it's not a program that's out there because people don't know about it.
Yeah.
It's only at the graduate level that demography is really well known, and Cal Berkeley and Florida State do 2 programs. So,
Yeah. Duly noted. Thank you.
thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our agenda, we are going to have Charlene Peterson with New Jersey School Boards, our rep, present our strategic plan.
Great.
Thank you
so
for-
much.
Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you for being
Thank you.
patient.
It is my pleasure. So I wanted to first start out before I go to the strategic plan, just kind of update the board a little bit. The board goals were shared with me, and I was excited to see that the board is pursuing New Jersey School Board board certification. It's one of its goals. So for the benefit of the public, that New Jersey School Boards helps recognize boards that take the time to learn together, to train together as a board team, to develop shared learning experiences together as a board, and acknowledge the benefit that is to your community. If your staff and students and everyone are continuing to learn, it sets a great example for the board to do that as well. So New Jersey School Boards puts together kind of a set of criteria for a board to be able to attain board certification. So that criteria is that over a 4-year period, a board needs to train together as a board team for 16 hours. Then in addition to that, to make sure that the board is, doing all of its work, we ask that the board that you have a policy wellness check, to have our policy department look at your policy. So you've done that already. You did that last year. We go through one of your bargaining agreements. So you've done that as well. It's important that the board complete a board self-evaluation. So you have done that also, that all of the boards need to be current in their mandatory training, that you pass the governance section of CUSEC. So these are all things that that your board has already accomplished. So to kind of let you know where you are in the training aspect. So like I said, we go back 4 years. So right now the board has 10 hours, or 10 of the 16 credits needed. Tonight, we're going to add one more, right? So we are well on our way here. So just wanted the board to, recognize that is a doable goal that the board has set for itself, and then you would be recognized at the Essex County meeting. So ideally, the end of the year, the last meeting is when they really do the big recognition. So just kind of wanted to make you aware of where you are in that process, and thank you for taking the time and making that commitment to one another and to your community. So just wanted to say thank you. I see my presentation's up here. I was laughing when he talked about that big old phone book, because when I have this, I'm like, our mailroom printed these single-sided. I'm like, this thing was weighing my bag down on my arm, and I was like, It's so many pages. So, so this is an outcome of all of the work. But really, to me, the most important part of all of this was the work that took place in this room with all of the participants that came and sat and had really great conversations together, talking about your school district. And I think that's really where the value comes in this process, because, as much as we say that, we want to engage our community, we want them to come out and help us understand what their expectations are of us as a district, that this is one of the most important ways to do that, is to bring them in through this strategic planning process. We kind of say, we're almost like giving you the keys to the car, right? Saying like, here you go, drive us to point us to what direction it is that you would like us to go in the next 5 years. So it really is a valuable way as a staff and a community member to come together and be part of this process. And it also then results in a plan that would look completely differently than if the board put one together, if the administration put one together. It would not look anything like this plan, because this plan is truly built from the ground up of, the feedback from the participants that are here. So just kind of wanted to walk you through that process, recognizing that you are left with a plan that will help guide your district forward for the next 5 years. So again, just kind of wanted to say thank you to the board and thank you to everyone who participated, because it really does make a difference. And it's important as a board that you had that vision to say, we want to hear from our stakeholders. We want you to be part of this process. And it's important that we move our district forward together in a way that is meaningful to all of our stakeholders. So when we had everyone together, that's how we talked about strategic planning, is we talked about the value of having that common vision, that shared vision. What is it that we all want for our students, recognizing, it takes the whole community, right, to be part of the work that we do here. So as we looked at strategic planning and said, okay, we recognize now that we have a baseline to work from, right? When we talk about those annual goals that we set, that we have, as part of the district goals and the superintendent's evaluation, this is where it should come from. This is now the plan that we have to get started and to work from, and to, guide the work that we do. So we went through a process of over through 3 meetings of essentially answering 3 questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to be 5 years from now? And then how are we going to get there? So the first meeting essentially addressed the question of where are we now? And it started out with the superintendent providing a state of the district report that provided some basic, just an overview of the district. We wanted to make sure that we weren't influencing anyone's opinions or anything, but just wanted to give you some information so that when we went into small groups of mixed stakeholders, those small groups had meaningful information to have good conversations about the district. So then from those conversations, we asked them to identify what they believe the strengths of the district to be, and then any challenges, and then any opportunities that we could take advantage of. So then that kind of helped inform where we are now. Then the next meeting, then we came back and we moved forward 5 years into the future and talked about then what are the things that we would want for the district 5 years from now. And then the last piece, the last meeting then was developing the roadmap, writing those goal statements. And, so essentially our work was to identify the what is the direction we want to see the district go in? What are those things that we think are so important to move the district forward that we are going to use them to help, guide that plan? And then the final piece of this, so then we were all done with our work once we developed that what. And then we turned it over to the administration and said, okay, you are the educational experts. Now, this is your guidance. This is the what, and now left it up to them then to develop the how and develop the action plans to tell us how they were going to carry out the what that we helped determine. So as we went through this process, you guys put this amazing poster together that I really loved, that took this information and kind of synthesized it into a way that it all made sense together and put it all in one place, right? So talked about, first we always looked at your mission and vision and kind of made sure that that was the core of the work that we did. And then, like I said, so just going to kind of take you through what some of these steps look like. So this is just kind of an excerpt of that state of the district report, and the full report is in here, but just kind of wanted to show you. So just some of the information then that we shared with everyone. And then, like I said, then the group's task was to identify those, those top 10 strengths and challenges. So just wanted to show you that these were some of the things that the groups came up with, and that you have the full reports in the back here that have all of the information. And, it's interesting to see too, that some of the things with the group, like you can see community involvement, where there were some things that were identified as a strength, but then also considered to be a challenge as well. So those were the types of things then that we looked at. So then we now, like I said, had this sense of where we are now. So then that visioning exercise was, looking at, or, considering that it's 5 years from now, the district is being recognized in the state as the top district for advancing student achievement. We asked everyone here to, think about the fact that you are being asked to give a speech to talk about the district. So what would be the title of your speech? And then what are those things that took place to allow for this remarkable success? And said, throw your budget out the window, throw any standards out the window. We didn't want anything to limit your thinking. What is it that you truly want for your students as we move forward? So these are some of the speech titles that you can see there on the side. And then these are some of the visions that some of that the groups came up with in terms of things that they would like to see the district accomplishing 5 years from now. So then we took that information and said, okay, if we only had, say, 3 or 4 buckets, and we could put all the strengths, all the challenges, and all the visions into those buckets, what would those look like? And those are essentially our goal areas. So then, in some of our somewhat, we always have to make sure we have some kind of a student achievement goal area, right? But if you look at yours, you can see, like, to me, your plan more so than many was very student focused. As you look at these buckets, you can see improving student outcomes and achievement, 21st century students, college and career ready, social and emotional learning, DEI and belonging. So those were all like student focused things. And then looked at our community and school relationships. So these are the areas then that like I said, we took all the strengths, the challenges, and the visions, and we resorted them by those buckets. So that when the group came back then for that meeting to write the goal statements, each group worked on a bucket. And then that group was responsible then for developing one big overarching goal statement. If we think about the fact that this plan is effective for 5 years, so the goal statement needs to be broad enough to be effective for that time span. And then said, okay, we have this big broad goal statement. We then need to break it down into some smaller, more meaningful parts so that the administration can write some action plans that connect to what it is that you were thinking. We don't want to be prescriptive in what they look like, but just kind of want to give some direction. So then each one of the groups then, like I say, develop this big, broad, overarching goal statement, and then their supporting objectives. So in the improving student outcomes and achievement, we can see that, the overarching goal statement was to develop and execute a plan that promotes best practices to increase student outcomes and achievement. So again, you can kind of get that sense of what the group is looking for, and then broke it down into those meaningful parts. Then the next bucket looked at the college and career 21st century students, and again, to develop citizens who are college, career, and life ready. And then took and broke that down into its parts. Then the next one was looking at social and emotional learning, DEI, and belonging, and said to optimize conditions where individuals can access opportunities, resources, and support to foster complete inclusion and belonging. So you can see how we're really trying to kind of create an environment where, developing this roadmap that you can now start picturing in your head, seeing how the district can move forward based on these things. And then the last one was looking at school and community relationships, and said that district curriculum and programs will develop civic-minded students with an emphasis on community engagement. So again, talking about that importance of still staying student-centered. So then this is just an excerpt. You have all of the action plans. So like I said, then this was the what. This was the plan then that we turned over to the administration and asked them to develop the how. So the how is typically taking the goals and objectives and breaking it down and saying, okay, what are the tasks to accomplish that? Who's going to be responsible? What kind of resources do we need? What's the timeline? Some things we might be able to do now, some things we may have to budget for, some things, are sequential. We have to do this first before you can do the other thing. And then importantly, what are the indicators of success? How will the board know? How will the community know? How will the participants, know who helped through this process, know if we've accomplished what we set out to do? So the indicators of success are an important way to tell us that. So we now have this comprehensive plan that lays out the what, identifies the how. So we are now ready to go moving forward. And then this will be an important part of conversation that your staff has, and help guiding that work. It should be, part of the board's work as you're looking at priorities, as you're looking at budgets, recognizing, are we providing the resources and help and the support that are needed to help accomplish this plan? So just wanted to say thank you to everyone who did help, and recognizing that it really truly does make a difference in a district when they have a plan that provides the guidance that was based on input from the community. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated, and thank you to everyone here for supporting this initiative. So.
And the full action plan and all of the documents are on our website for the public to look at as well.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very much, Charlene.
Thank
Does
you.
anyone
It is
have any
my-
questions?
you.
Thank you.
I'm just a comment of thank you very much. The district has been through 15 years, so we've completed 3 5-year plans. So this is going to bring us
Bless
into
you.
20 years of strategic planning. And I think it's great because as board members come on and go off in new election cycles, it always gives a roadmap of where the district is going and how to get there. So thank you for your time and put in the work in with us.
My pleasure.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Safe travel.
Thank you. We're going to move on to our business administrator report. Mr. Cruz?
Good evening, everyone. Actually have a brief update tonight. In finance, we have our July financials and the board resolutions for approval. We have the board secretary report, treasury report, and transfer report. They're all in agreement. Next month, the business office will continue to work with our auditors on the fiscal year 2023 review process, and I anticipate that will be completed and reported out at the December board meeting. Lastly, I do want to encourage all families that qualify for our free reduced lunch program to take advantage of submitting your applications if you haven't done so already. As you may already know, Verona does not participate in the National School Lunch Program. We do not get reimbursed for the federal lunch participation, but the board does sponsor the free lunch for all of our students. So the same meals that all of our students receive in paid lunches, the free reduced lunch students that do qualify do receive those meals. And if you have any questions about the application process or need any support, the board office is available for that. And also your school administrative offices, the main office will actually support you in the application process. So
Jorge, what's the rate this year for a family of 4? What do they have? What's the income maximum to do either the full or the partial?
So the family of 4, they would have to make, I believe, under $54,000. So if a family of 4 is under that $54,000 for income, then they do qualify for the free lunch program this year.
And
Yeah.
just one quick question, if we wanted to say opt into, and I'm not saying, if we wanted to opt into National School Lunch Program, is there a time frame? Like, is there a deadline that we have to opt in by a certain day for it
Yes.
to go into? When is that?
So normally that's in the spring. So if we wanted to participate in the National School Lunch for next school year, we would have to make that determination before the end of April. So that process in order to get approved and submitted at a certain point, once we hit 4% of qualifying students, that's going to be a decision we will have to make at that point to enter the program. Right now, we're hovering around 1% district-wide. So 1% of our students do qualify for free reduced lunch. That concludes the report for tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cruz. Moving on to our student representative report, Ms. Reese Shahado. Always pleasure to hear from Shahado.
There we go. Every meeting. So tomorrow, Student Council will have its first meeting of the year for all representatives and officers, first meeting of the school year and first meeting since some structural changes were made this year. Senior class positions were eliminated this year, so that's served by the executive council instead. So that'll be tomorrow at lunch, first one of the year. Back to school night at BHS will be Thursday, September 28th. And just another small, like itty bitty one, rehearsals for the fall play have begun and will continue until November 17th, opening night. Agatha Christie murder mystery this year.
Just one question. Do you know when the student activities or the extracurricular club fair is? That's the word.
Club fair was today at lunch. Participation across all grade levels. It was held in the main gym due to the weather today.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
I want to say that having Reese at the retreat was awesome. You added so much value, and I
Yes.
thought you added a lot of energy to the group, and it made me so excited that you killed it. So thank you.
And I'm really glad that I got to go to the retreat. That was a great opportunity, and it provided a lot of insight and perspective to the position for me too.
I think just for the sake of the public, the retreat took place on Saturday, September 16th. The full board, Mr. Cruz, the superintendent, Reese, and we had Kathleen Helowa, is that how you pronounce her name? A consultant lead it, and it was awesome because, as Mrs. Peterson just said, we were able to get our board goals accomplished. We are going to have our strategic plan, set our district goals. So it really was great. And the participation and camaraderie and ideas that were shared in really a very open and comfortable environment. The 4 hours went like a blink, and it was very productive. So thank you to Pam and Diana for organizing that. It was great.
And I will say, although this is my 11th year as superintendent in the state of New Jersey, that was my first retreat. And it was great.
Thank you, Mr. Waka, also for recommending, because it was really it was a great day. So thank you, Reese, for your update. We are going to move on to committee reports. And first, we have Education and Student Achievement. Education Committee.
Okay, so we met on Sunday. Thursday, thank you. We met on Thursday. It's all blending right now. And we were very fortunate that Reese has joined our education committee. I think she's going to add a lot of perspective, especially when we start talking about courses and curriculum. I think that it's going to be great having her there. A few things, the CPAC is attending all our back to school nights, which is the first time they've done that. For those who don't know, the CPAC, it's also called CHILD. It's the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee. So if you have a student who, has special education needs or a 504 plan, definitely reach out to them. There are 2 open CPAC meetings, which are on October 4th and March 6th. And those will be attended by the Director of Special Services, and Tanya Simmons and the CPAC board, and they will have general discussions about concerns or achievements in our school district, because we do have a lot of achievements. One of the good things we've done so far, we purchased several AAC devices, which are communication devices for students who cannot speak or, have communication difficulties for the preschool. They've done some training, and they'll be provided to the students so that we can help them learn and help them communicate with themselves and their teachers and their peers. The in-class support classes, which are our pushing classes, ICI classes, have started in grades 3 at FN Brown and Forest and grade 4 at Brookdale. So far, everything, it was only week 2, but so far everyone seems to be really happy with the classes and the teachers are working well together. For those who don't know, an inclusion class would have one general ed teacher and one special ed teacher, and they co-teach the class. And it's a great opportunity for our students who may have some special ed needs, but aren't so severe that they need to be pulled out, to be able to maintain, as much contact with their general ed peers. It's a really great system. The high school LLD class, that classroom is still a work in progress. We're still trying to get that kitchen done, but hopefully that will be coming soon. They did go on their first field trip. They went to a local garden center where they helped set up for a sale that the center was having. This allows students the opportunity to put some skills that they've been working on in the classroom out in the community and get some experience doing tasks, and it could help them decide which direction they want to go in life. The extended school year dates, if anyone's out there is looking for them, those are set for next year already. It's June 24th to July 23rd with a couple days off for 4th of July. So if you have a kid you believe is going to need ESY, you can write those dates down. Care Plus, as we've been talking about Care Plus for several months now, they have started meeting with students. Care Plus is our on-site therapeutic supports. So they've started meeting with students at the high school and the middle school. And we've also discussed, because we were talking about Care Plus, there's new risk assessment procedures and training coming. A risk assessment happens if someone feels that a student is a danger to themselves or others, and they will do an in-house screening. And fortunately with Care Plus, if it has to go past the screening phase with the parents' permission and consent, we can actually do on-site clearances for students, which is great because it can, it could really get students back to the classroom if they are not at risk, or identify students that may need additional supports. There's a new system, there's a new process being put into place. It codifies a lot of the stuff that we've been doing already and leaves more of a paper trail so that we are sure that all the steps have been taken appropriately and that nothing was missed. Okay. And then they also will be documenting re-entry meetings. So if a student has to go and get some extra support outside the school and can't come back yet, they are documenting the re-entry meeting, which wasn't happening really before. The gifted classes are starting, the gifted program right now. The teacher is working with staff and administrators to identify students. So the goal is to start the actual programming in October. There's going to be a committee established at each school to help identify students. Right now, there are about 200 students who have preliminarily been identified through a combination of parents, teachers, math test scores, and in a couple cases, the principal. So that is well on its way. They're hoping for next year that we can do some of this in the spring so that we can get the actual program up and running. But obviously, because of when we filled the position, that wasn't possible. Dr. Miller is doing an audit on all of the Atlas mapping, which is where our curriculum will be housed from now on. Once he's satisfied that it is correct, he will release that and the public will be able to access it. We've used it a couple times. It's fairly user-friendly. You just kind of click and you can see what the curriculum is and the breakdown of units. They are holding a math parent night for elementary students on October 11th. What they are going to look to see if it can be recorded because, you know, we all have multiple priorities. So they're going to try to record it, and this will kind of help parents understand new math, which is probably even newer math than when I learned math. So, which is great, because then, you know, when we're helping kids with homework, it'll be good. And then observations have started for teachers. They're doing it a little differently this year. They're going to do a planning conference first and then have the teacher talk about how they're going to do the lesson, and then the observer will observe the lesson. So that way they can give feedback on all aspects of it, of the teaching. Foundation training has.
Jim?
Sure.
Why is a pre-conference a change?
Sorry.
We always had a pre-conference under, you know, if it was an announced observation, you have to have a pre-conference. The role that the administrator plays is going to be very different. We're going to be using those pre-conferences to reinforce the evaluation system and subsequently our instructional model and what we're going to next year with the focus teacher evaluation model that updates.
So we know we're transitioning to a new model
Yes.
next year.
And
So
we're using pre-conference as a vehicle to help that along.
I get you. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, okay, foundations training is happening. Okay, sorry. Hey, technology is not my friend today. Foundations training is going on right now for K through 2, as I've tried to say, including the principals, which will be great. Letters training, which is a multisensory phonics-based program, is restarting. The first cohort is still going through it. It takes several years for a cohort to go through, but so they're gearing up for the second year, I think. The mentoring meetings have started. That's it. The next, there was a professional development day just passed on September, right? Yeah, September 22nd. How is the end of September already? So the next PD day is October 9th. And then New Teacher Academy started. That was the end of August, 28th and 29th. And I think that is everything that I have, unless I missed something.
Really, you just mentioned it, the foundations training and the fact that the supervisors are participating in it. For those, you know, for the public that may not be familiar with foundations, it's a phonics based. So foundations is a phonics based program, K through 2. Right before phonics is phonemic awareness. So that's the hearing of sounds. And then this is really the first steps to reading. It's a really, I'm a fan of foundations, but I think having and inviting the supervisors into this professional development and principals is key to really fully supporting those K2 teachers and rounding out that really important K2 phonics instruction. So I just wanted to reiterate on that because I think it's important for the public to understand exactly how important the foundations work is, and then the fact that the principals, supervisors principals are a part of that to further support the teachers.
Kind of a silly question, but like the phonics training, that's fascinating. But when you say multisensory, like what does that, like in a practical sense, what does that encompass? If we have an idea there.
multisensory is when a student is being taught through multi-senses. So you're hearing it, you're seeing it, there are emotions that go with it, you're touching it, you're like there's magnetic boards. So the student is able to build words, to move vowel sounds. So it's this multi-sensory approach, which really is best practice for me.
Huh. Wow, that's fascinating.
Thank you, Ms. Rosella, for that. On to our finance committee. We met, yeah, sure. It's not much, right? It's not much.
So finance, yeah, we met also this week, right? Is it this week, last week? I don't know, they're all blending together. So Jorge really spoke to part of it. Hold on one second, sorry, 18. No, sorry. There's really not too much here. I have some good news that I'm excited to share. So I'm really looking forward to getting to that part of it. Okay, so one thing that is exciting is that our life skills program, the new life skills program at the high school, we are going to be collaborating with ShopRite so that we will have an account, a district account there, so that teachers are able to easily go to ShopRite, pick up any needs that they, anything that they need for, the running of the class. And Jorge put in a great process for the process of the purchases. Let's see, we'll have our business report provided in August for the remaining audit. We're continuing to prepare for QSAC. So Jorge met with the county VA. Again, just kind of preparing for the process of that for the building walkthroughs. And then they were reported out, Jorge reported out some really exciting things. So as far as revenue goes, we had an increase of a little over 33,000. With our new interest with Citizens Bank, we had a gain of $193,111. And in our tight budget, these are some really big hefty numbers for us. And then not only are we seeing revenue, but in responsible spending, we have saved $121,381 in legal fees in this past fiscal year. And then again, with the Chromebook grant, we are gaining $99,940. So again, we not only are seeing, fiscal responsibility in the savings, but we're also really looking to see where we can find revenue, and we have been. So good work, Jorge.
Thank you very much.
I just
Thank
have
you.
a quick question on that. So any additional revenue, how does that go into this current budget and we're able to use it, or does that kind of get bookmarked and when we do the budget for starting the new year?
Correct. So that was the end of fiscal 23, which ended at June 30th. Usually any surplus from that fiscal year doesn't go into the current budget. It'll get fed into the new budget, which is 24-25.
Okay.
So we're going to start working on that at the end of November, start building, meeting with Diane and myself and all the administration team, start doing the budget build process at that point. And when we do when the auditors actually do the presentation, we also will make a recommendation on how to utilize those surplus funding, whether it's going to go into reserves or is it going to be used as fund balance into the new budget.
Awesome. Thank you.
Moving on to our policy committee report. Did you meet policy? Okay.
We did. Yeah. So resolution, it's coordinates with resolution G3. So you could see what policies that we talked about. Most of them are just standard updates, changing language, pupils to students, just updating, modernizing language, doing any cleanup on that. One of the changes that was noteworthy is policy 5517, which is the school district issued student identification cards. So on the back of those cards, when you have student ID cards, you need to give the information for crisis prevention hotline. So all that information will be on the back of our student ID cards. The other one that was noteworthy, in my opinion, was the field trip policy 2340. So once that gets approved, this is the first reading. It'll be up for approval, the second reading October 10th. So then there'll be an update and change in the forms that the teachers fill out, give to their building principals, ultimately going up to the superintendent, and then for the board to vote on. So the other one that we spoke about as well was 5513, which is the care of school property. And one of the questions that came up is the way it's worded is just that, school property, and it kind of focused on textbooks and Chromebooks and things like that. And one of the questions was if something happens in the terms of vandalism, like we had a pipe issue that flooded the gym and we had to do that, but there is a separate policy that covers vandalism, which is 7610. So between those two policies, the care of our facilities and our school property should be covered on that. Everything else was just basic mandatory policies that we had to put in there from Strauss Esme, with no big changes.
I think the only one that is noteworthy, and I'm sure Mr. Walker knows this because he's dealing with it as a school superintendent, is sick
Sick
leave.
leave,
The sick.
the law changed.
Basically, teachers can use their sick leave for more than just being sick for a month. The old law where they kind of pulled it down to it was for your own illness or if you were quarantined as a result. Difficult, written a long time before we quarantined for pandemic, so everyone kind of went to that. But it really now can be for if your child's daycare closes and you don't have childcare, if you have to go to court for a real estate transaction, they can use sick time. So what this policy does is it reinforces to our staff that sick leave definition may have changed, but in the collective bargaining agreement, I should say, we allowed for a certain number of family illness days for that illness of a close family member and personal business days that they still need to be used for family illness and personal business. So it just kind of shores up this law changes only for sick leave.
Thank you. Denise, did you have anything that I missed or you wanted to add? And our apologies out to Reese because we did forget to
meant
put
to.
you on the
I did. I
invite.
forgot.
Yeah, and I know you asked to be on that, so duly noted. So you will be on the next one. Yeah.
Of course, I want to discuss it.
Although the next one
Policy.
will be a big one because we just got a new update today from Strauss Esme.
See that?
There we go.
The fun is yet to come.
And in terms of the ID card policy, I just wanted to note that that information is already provided on student ID changes, so that won't be like a major change, but I'm glad that it's in policy.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to open it up to public comments on agenda action items only. If anyone would like to come to the podium to speak on anything we're voting on, please state your name and address, and you have 3 minutes. Oh, you could come to the podium though and state your name and address. Is it about something we're voting on?
That would be at the
Oh,
end.
yeah, sure.
Is that the end?
Well, we're not voting. Are we voting on that?
No.
Right? Sorry.
So-
First timer.
That's okay. Just
Hi.
state hi.
So what do I have to do?
State your name and address, please.
My name is Alana Dirk. I live at 90 Pease Avenue in Verona. I heard that I actually attended this meeting. I don't often attend the Board of Ed meetings. Sometimes I do. But not often. I attended this meeting in hopes of finding out more information about the sexual assault case in the high school. But anyways, I ended up hearing about the overcrowding potential projections of presentation, which I found very interesting. I just want to make sure that you all are aware because the overcrowding in our schools was an issue for me. Has to be over 4 years ago now. My son is in 8th grade. I have 3 children in Verona schools, phenomenal schools. And I was very concerned over 4 years ago about the overcrowding in his classroom in the Forest Avenue district of town. And I had reached out and gotten no responses or was dismissed about it. So I looked into the law and just so you all know, before you blindly take into what you were presented today, there is a law, NJAC 6A 26-2. Area allowance per FTE student means 125 square feet for preschool through grade 5, 134 square feet for grades 6 through 8, and 151 square feet for grades 9 through 12. At the time, I never pursued any sort of argument against the school district. I never went any further than raising my concern for the overcrowding in the Forest Avenue specific school. I don't know what it is in the other schools. Are they overcrowded? I don't know. I don't have kids there. But I can tell you that in my moment in time and the moments in time that followed that, the school was overcrowded. I understand that you all got a presentation tonight, and I heard the same presentation. I didn't even listen to this meeting because of that. I had no idea. But when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, these people are being reassured that we don't have an overcrowding problem. We have an overcrowding problem. I feel like we do. I feel like we've had an overcrowding problem in some of our schools and we're hush hush about it. And maybe we can shift the numbers a little and maybe we can move people around. But in reality, you're going to introduce more people. There needs to be a larger plan in place. Okay. Just accepting that, oh, the growth and the, COVID made it so people are not moving into town. Sorry, your time.
You can finish your sentence. Yeah, you can finish your sentence. Sorry.
I think that you need to dig further. I think that you need to look into New Jersey state law on the square footage per child that is legally allowable. And I think that it's something that our district has overlooked for a long time. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Okay. We are going to move on. I need a, let's see.
Discussion items? Discussion items?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. Yes, discussion items. Discussion items.
Thank you, Lisa. So I just want to have a quick discussion. There is a resolution that's put forth for tomorrow through the Essex County School Board Association. And the resolution is regarding book bans. And I want to be incredibly clear right now that I do not support book bans at all. I'm a literacy person. I believe that books are avenues for windows, mirrors, sliding doors. I can go on and on about that. So I just want to be very clear that I do not support book bans. I just do want to have a quick conversation though about this particular resolution because there's some language in it that I think is a little concerning, and not necessarily because of book bans, but because I think that it's overstepping from a school board position. So I wanted to have a little bit of a conversation about this to see as a board how we feel about this. So in particular, and there were some revisions that have been made, and I've been following the revisions over
Mhm.
the week. So I was happy to see that some things, as for example, the first reading had public libraries in there, and public libraries and schools are completely two separate entities. So that was removed. So I thought that was a good, a good thing.
Mhm.
But I still am a little concerned about the language that includes state and local officials in a school board resolution. I think that we all have very different roles in the state, and to have that bulked into a resolution is worrisome to me. And I also think that it's very bold when there are statements made about what the New Jersey School Board Association believes. I think that as districts, we have beliefs and we have resolutions. And is something that we can, discuss as a district. But I think general statements like this for any topic is a little worrisome for me. So I just wanted to bring this up, have a conversation around it.
So. What this essentially is for people. These are county rep. And if it passes, whatever the resolution ends up being, if that passes, it goes to the convention conference in December. They'll vote again, and if it passes there statewide, then this will become a recommended policy manual advocacy kind of thing for the NJ. Now, are they under any obligation to, advocate directly against that? No, because there's a billion other things that, they're recommending. So I personally believe that this really carries any teeth, but philosophically, I agree in that the one thing that every board member ever complains about, they say, I wish the public would know what powers we have and what powers we don't have, right? But I think it's certainly not going to help the problem by, I think, the proclamation giving the NJSBA powers that it clearly does not have, and it can't ever enforce. So, Denise can make a decision, I guess, that Denise is ultimately going to make. But no matter what, Denise is just going to vote for one vote out of how many school districts in the county are going to be there. So even if it does pass as is, I still don't think it's anything more than just proclamation.
And that's why I wanted to have a discussion. I know that it's something that has been happening, from a school board, and I just really felt uncomfortable about this state and local official language in it. Yeah. Well,
Essex County School Board Association is putting forth a resolution that will to go to the
to
delegate.
take it
yeah.
to the delegation.
Yeah.
I don't want to see us as a school board or as an Essex County School Board to get into the business of speaking on behalf of state and local officials as school board members. So again, this is my discussion here is less about because I do not look at and more about the language of including state and local officials into school board work. So that is.
Yeah.
Happy I had planned, I was gonna try to go to the meeting. It unfortunately conflicts with another meeting I have. It's just been a week. But I am gonna try to log in. I'm happy to put forth that instead of all state and local officials, we can do something like all school board members. Because it talks about as well as school administrators and librarians. So school board members, administrators and librarians. So that way we're not reaching beyond the walls of our school. Although we would count as local officials, but I understand what you're saying, right? So I'm happy to put forth that, provided that I am able to log on.
And again, it's not, I don't want to make a bigger deal about this. I just saw it and I wanted to kind of raise that in conversation.
It gives an opportunity, I think, to respond from him.
In writing?
In an email, if he had concerns or teaching
agree with Chris that it's not gonna have teeth, but everything kind of funnels up and down. It's kind of like a two-way highway, and New Jersey school boards, although they're not gonna be all end all, they do become the voice of the collective 600 municipalities that help, either advocate or, challenge things that are going to law.
And I will say, having attended the meeting in March, that out of that meeting, there were several resolutions. I mean, most of them passed with a lot of support. And I honestly think the most important one was probably the most boring one, which was that if we have a new budget item, like when we did full day pre-K, full day kindergarten, we had to start it in January. There's a new the resolution was to allow it to start the following year. So in some ways, the more boring resolutions really are the more important resolutions. And sometimes I think, I like you, do not believe in banning any books. I want to be very clear about that. And I think it's important that we, advocate for that. And I think we have strong policies internally about that. But I will put forth that change. I have no problem with that.
Action items?
The only other thing that I was going to bring up, and Ms. Peterson brought it up, was our self-evaluation. So I'm very happy that this board participates in that every year. It's one of the very few things that allow us to be, introspective and reflective and be transparent and accountable to the public on how we feel we're doing as an entity, because nobody really evaluates us. I've done it all 9 years that I've been on the board, and with this year's, Charlene left us the numbers.
Right.
And the last couple of years, like, we've been trending, we still do well overall, but the last couple of years, we have kind of rated ourselves better as individual board members than functioning as a full board. I personally think that's a little problematic. I feel like, the whole should be better than the individual pieces. So hopefully going forward, I think this gives us a guide to look at the areas. The area that had a huge drop was board and community. We went from 3.5 last year down to 2.6. And the year before it trended down as well. And I think we're all aware of it. It's something that we talked about in retreat and we've talked about publicly. So hopefully going forward, we're going to be able to meld together better and work better, or at least view ourselves working better as a whole than as individual board members. I think there's definitely the strength in the unification.
Thank you, Mrs. Freshy. I agree. And every time I do this self-eval, I always feel, especially when I'm evaluating myself, I feel like if I'm going to give myself a very good or a great, I don't like, so I always end up rating myself a lot lower than I probably should be. So it's just the nature. That's how I feel. So I feel like that's probably what we all probably do. So
But the scores reflect opposite. They show individuals feeling they do better individually than as a whole. So I just think it's something to be mindful of going forward.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so we need to have a motion to approve our resolutions A1 to A2. Moved by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by Mrs. Ferrara. Any discussion? Mr. Cruz, can you please call roll?
Yes. Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella,
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar, Mrs. Prisco,
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. I need a motion to approve resolutions B1 all the way to B7.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Virzella, seconded by
Second.
Mrs. Freshy. Any discussion? Mr. Cruz, can you please call roll?
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella,
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar, Ms.
Yes,
Mrs. Prisco.
yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our education, I need a motion to approve resolutions C1 all the way to C11. Motion by,
About 2 working mics, I
Oh.
think, right now.
oh,
So
so I need any,
it's gonna have to be you
any
guys
discussion?
motioning.
any
But I'll
discussion?
motion this one.
And I'll second it.
Motion by Mr. Waka, second by Mrs. Rosella. Any discussion? Mr. Cruz, can you please call roll?
Sure. Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella.
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar. Mrs. Prisco.
Yes.
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to athletics co-curricular, I need a motion, please, to approve resolutions D1. Motion by Mrs. Ferrer. Yeah.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Freshy. Any discussion? No, Mr. Cruz, roll, please.
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella.
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar.
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco.
Yes,
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
thank you. There's nothing for, no resolutions for facilities, so we're moving on to finance. I need a motion to approve resolutions F1 to F6.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by
I'll second it.
Mrs. Frizella. Any discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Cruz, can you please call roll?
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella.
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar.
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco.
Yes,
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
thank you. Moving on to governance and policy, I need a motion, please, to approve resolutions G1 through G3.
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by, a second, Mrs. Ferrara. Any discussion?
I have a quick question. For the school self-assessment for determining grades, what is the next step? Like, how is that used moving forward?
And the state will look at our scores, and it will either affirm or send them back to us for a revision. What should be happening is we should be looking at areas where we're low and improving.
So this is step one.
This is
Then it
step
goes
one.
to the state,
Yeah.
and we wait for it to come back, then we go from there.
Yes,
Okay.
and hopefully, by the next time we sit down, I mean, the schools know where they rated themselves lower. And it tends to be from school to school to school across the state in areas that are very hard to meet the criteria. It's very difficult to train every volunteer in your building on your HIV policy, especially when you have parent volunteers coming in. So that tends to be an area where we are, we self-assessed lower than the 4 points that we could assign ourselves for that one. But they should be looking at it at the end of their self-assessment and looking at their practices for this year and making those changes so that they're not continually just giving themselves a 2.
Thank you. Mr. Cruz, can you please call roll?
Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Mrs. Frizella.
Yes.
Mrs. Farrar.
Yes.
Mrs. Prisco.
Yes,
Mrs. Freshy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
thank you. Moving on to public comments. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to speak on any item, please come up, state your name and your address, and you have 3 minutes. Seeing none. I need let's see, a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Freshy, seconded by,
Second.
second by Mrs. Ferrer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Our next public meeting will be Tuesday, October 10th, beginning with confidential session at 6 PM and public session at 7 PM in the Verona School Learning Commons. The meeting is adjourned and it is 8:47